She couldn't hear the gunshots, couldn't hear the screams, couldn't hear the Gestapo officer shouting orders just inches from her face, but she saw everything. It's March 1943, a checkpoint on the outskirts of occupied Lyon, France. Two Gestapo agents in their signature black leather coats stand before a young woman clutching a wicker basket. Her name is Claire Mitchell, and hidden beneath the vegetables in that basket are forged documents that could save 20 Jewish children from the death camps. The lead officer's eyes narrow. Something doesn't add up. He barks a question at her, his face inches from hers, spittle flying. Claire doesn't flinch. She can't hear a word he's saying. She's been deaf since birth. To the Gestapo. She appears weak, helpless, just another pathetic disabled girl trying to survive in Nazi-occupied France. They have no idea that this handicapped teenager has been running circles around them for 2 years, delivering messages for the French resistance, guiding Allied airmen to safety, and passing intelligence that has saved hundreds of lives. In that moment, as the officer's hand moves toward his pistol, Claire knows one wrong move means death. But she's learned something the Nazis never understood. Silence isn't weakness. Silence is camouflage. And she's about to prove it one more time. This is the true story of Claire Mitchell, the deaf courier who turned her disability into the Resistance's greatest weapon, who fooled the Gestapo again and again, and who showed that sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that makes no sound at all. If you're fascinated by untold stories of World War II heroes, by ordinary people who did extraordinary things under impossible circumstances, hit that subscribe button and notification bell. We bring you documented stories of courage that changed the world. Let me take you back to 1925, to a small village in eastern France, where a baby girl was born into silence. Claire Mitchell was born on a cold November morning in 1925 in the village of Beaumont, near Lyon. Her father, Thomas Mitchell, was an American engineer who'd stayed in France after World War I, having fallen in love with a local girl named Elise Moreau. They married, built a modest home, and dreamed of raising a family in the peaceful French countryside. But when baby Claire was born, something was wrong. She didn't startle at loud noises, didn't respond to her mother's voice. By the time she was 6 months old, the village doctor confirmed what her parents feared. Claire was profoundly deaf. She would never hear a sound in her life. In 1920s rural France, this was considered a tragedy, a curse. Some neighbors whispered that the child was being punished for something her parents had done. Others suggested she should be sent away to an institution where she'd be out of sight. Thomas and Elise refused. Their daughter would grow up at home, surrounded by love, learning to navigate a world that wasn't built for her, and Claire adapted. Children always do. By age 5, she developed her own way of understanding the world around her. She watched people's faces with an intensity that made some adults uncomfortable. She could read emotions in the twitch of an eyebrow, the tension in a jaw, the way someone's hands moved when they were nervous or excited. Her father, patient and methodical, taught her to lip read in both French and English. Every evening after dinner, he'd sit with her by the fireplace, speaking slowly, exaggerating each word's shape with his mouth. "Watch my lips, Claire. See how they move differently for each sound." She became exceptional at it. By age 8, she could follow entire conversations just by watching faces. She learned to sign, communicating with graceful hand movements that her whole family learned. Her mother created a sort of home language with her, a combination of French Sign Language and gestures they invented together, but the outside world was harder. School was a nightmare. The village school had no accommodations for deaf children. Teachers didn't know how to reach her. Other children, cruel in the way children can be, mocked her. They'd shout things behind her back, laugh when she didn't respond. Some would sneak up behind her and clap suddenly, delighting in her lack of reaction, as if her deafness was a magic trick they were trying to disprove. Claire learned to keep her head down, to stay invisible, to observe from the margins. These years of being overlooked, of being underestimated, of being treated as less capable than she actually was, these would become her greatest weapons when the war came. By her teenage years, Claire had developed an almost supernatural ability to read situations. She noticed things. When the baker's wife was having an affair, Claire knew before anyone else. She'd seen the way the woman's face changed when a particular customer entered the shop, the way her hands trembled as she counted his change. When Monsieur Bertrand was embezzling from the church collection, Claire spotted it in how his eyes darted away when the priest counted the Sunday offerings. In the slight flush in his cheeks, her father called her his little detective. Her mother worried. She saw too much for someone so young. Then came 1939, and the world changed. Claire was 13 when Germany invaded Poland. She couldn't hear the radio broadcasts of Hitler's speeches, but she saw the fear in adults' faces as they gathered around radios in the cafe. She watched her father's jaw tighten as he read the newspaper, saw her mother's hands shake as she served dinner. "Will there be war, Papa?" She signed one evening. Thomas Mitchell looked at his daughter and signed back slowly. "Yes, I'm afraid there will be." And there was in May 1940. The German blitzkrieg smashed through France's defenses. The impregnable Maginot Line was bypassed. French forces, still reeling from the losses of World War I, crumbled. By June, Paris had fallen. By the end of the month, France had surrendered. Nazi Germany now occupied the northern half of France, including Claire's village near Lyon. The Vichy government, collaborating with the Nazis, controlled the south. Claire was 14 years old when German soldiers marched into Beaumont. She felt their boots striking the cobblestones before she saw them. The vibrations traveled through the ground, a rhythmic pounding that made her think of her father's descriptions of earthquake tremors. Then they appeared. Gray uniforms, swastika armbands, rifles on shoulders, officers in cars, barking orders she couldn't hear but could see in the frightened faces of villagers who scrambled to obey. Red banners with black swastikas appeared on buildings. The town hall, the church, even the school where Claire had been mocked now flew the flag of her country's conquerors. The occupation brought new rules. Curfews, rations, identity papers that had to be shown on demand. And for the village's small Jewish population, yellow stars that had to be sewn onto their coats. Claire watched the Cohen family, who ran the fabric shop where her mother bought thread, forced to wear those stars. She saw the humiliation in Mrs. Cohen's eyes, the fear in the children's faces. She saw how other villagers began to avoid them, afraid of guilt by association. And then One November morning in 1942, the Cohen family was gone. Their shop was boarded up. Neighbors whispered that the Gestapo had come in the night. TRUCKS idling in the street, soldiers dragging the family from their beds. Destination unknown. But everyone could guess. Claire stood in front of that boarded-up shop, staring at the notice posted on the door. Jewish property confiscated by order of the Reich. She couldn't hear the world's sounds, but in that moment she heard something else. A voice inside her, louder than any sound, saying, "This is evil, and someone has to fight it." That someone, she decided, would be her. Asterisk. The Gestapo presence in Beaumont grew through 1942 and into 1943. The village that Claire had known all her life became a place of fear and suspicion. The Gestapo, the Geheim. Staatspolizei, Nazi Germany's secret police, operated differently than regular Wehrmacht soldiers. Wehrmacht troops occupied territories. The Gestapo terrorized them. They wore civilian clothes, often long leather coats, regardless of weather. They moved through villages like sharks, eyes always watching, looking for any sign of resistance, any hint of disloyalty. They used informants, torture, and midnight arrests to root out opposition. In Claire's village, everyone learned to be careful. A careless word could mean arrest. A suspicious action could mean interrogation. Helping a Jew meant death, but Claire had an advantage no one else possessed. She was invisible to them. It started by accident. One afternoon in the market square, Claire was buying vegetables when two Gestapo officers stopped next to her, conversing in German. They spoke freely, assuming a teenage girl buying carrots posed no threat. What they didn't know was that Claire had learned to lip-read German as well as French. Her father, speaking both languages fluently, had taught her. It was supposed to be an educational exercise. Now it became an intelligence-gathering tool. She watched their lips carefully as she pretended to examine tomatoes. She caught fragments. Tonight. The printer, resistance pamphlets, 23 Rue de something. Her heart pounded. She forced herself to keep breathing normally to maintain her innocent expression. The officers finished their conversation and walked away, never suspecting that the deaf girl with the vegetables had understood every word. That evening, Claire made a decision that would change her life. She went to see Father Dominic at the church, a priest she'd always trusted. She wrote on a piece of paper, "I need to speak with someone from the resistance." Father Dominic's face went pale. He looked around nervously, then quickly wrote back, "I don't know what you mean." Claire wrote again, urgently, "The Gestapo plans to raid a printer tonight. Rue de la Republique. Someone must be warned." The priest studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly and wrote, "Come back at midnight. Use the side door." When Claire returned that night, slipping through the dark streets during curfew, she found Father Dominic with two other men. One was Marcel Dubois, a local teacher. The other introduced himself only as Antoine. They were skeptical at first. A deaf teenage girl wanted to help the resistance? How could she possibly be useful? What if this was a Gestapo trap using a sympathetic girl to infiltrate their network? But when Claire showed them what she'd written, the exact details she'd lip-read from the Gestapo officers, their skepticism evaporated. Mother of God, Antoine whispered. "The printer, Jacques, they're going to arrest him tonight." They sent a runner immediately. By the time the Gestapo raided the address at 2 a.m., the printer and all evidence of resistance pamphlets were gone. The officers found an empty shop and a very confused elderly couple who lived above it. Knowing nothing, 2 days later, Father Dominic asked Claire to meet them again. This time Antoine looked at her differently, with respect. "You saved a man's life," he said, speaking slowly so she could read his lips. "And you did it because the Gestapo didn't see you as a threat. They spoke freely in front of you." Claire nodded. "Would you be willing to do this again?" Antoine asked. She didn't hesitate. She signed yes, and so Claire Mitchell, at age 16, became a spy for the French resistance. Her role was simple, but extraordinarily dangerous. She would be their eyes and ears in places where others couldn't operate. She would go to markets where German officers gathered. She would stand in cafes waiting for her mother, watching German lips move. She would be present in public spaces, always watching, always reading, always remembering. The Germans never suspected her. To them, she was just another disabled village girl, pitiable, harmless, certainly not a threat to the Third Reich. They had no idea. Over the next months, Claire became increasingly valuable to the resistance. She developed a system. After each observation, she'd write detailed reports, what she'd seen, whose lips she'd read, what plans she'd discovered. Father Dominic would pass these to Antoine, who'd pass them up the chain. Her intelligence prevented dozens of arrests. When she lip-read Gestapo plans for a roundup of men for forced labor, the resistance had time to evacuate the targets. When she discovered the location of a new Gestapo office, saboteurs knew where to strike. When she spotted a French collaborator meeting with German officers, the resistance knew who to watch. But passive observation wasn't enough. By late 1943, the resistance leaders had a new role for Claire: courier. "You can move through checkpoints more easily than anyone," Antoine explained, his lips forming each word carefully. "They don't suspect you. They barely look at you. You're invisible." He was right. At German checkpoints where resistance fighters were being arrested daily, Claire would simply show her identification papers, which included a note about her deafness, and the guards would wave her through with barely a glance. Sometimes with pity, sometimes with contempt, but always quickly, eager to move on to more suspicious travelers. So Claire began carrying things. Messages sewn into the lining of her coat, forged documents hidden in false-bottomed baskets, money for resistance operations tucked into her shoes. Once she transported a disassembled pistol, piece by piece over several trips, each component hidden differently on her person. She guided Allied airmen who'd been shot down, leading them silently through the countryside to safe houses. She couldn't hear if German patrols were approaching, but she could feel the vibrations of truck engines through the ground. She'd perfected a system of staying ahead of danger through observation and intuition, but her greatest gift remained her ability to read lips, and that gift would be tested in the most dangerous way possible. March 14th, 1943. Claire received her most important assignment yet. A group of 20 Jewish children were being hidden in a convent outside. Lyon, the Gestapo was closing in informants, had revealed that the convent was sheltering illegal persons. The children needed to be moved immediately to a safer location across the demarcation line into Switzerland. But they needed forged transit documents, and those documents were currently with a resistance forger in Lyon named Bernard Katz. Claire's mission: travel to Lyon, retrieve the documents, and bring them back to Beaumont. Then they'd be passed to guides who would smuggle the children across the border. 20 children's lives depended on her succeeding. The journey to Lyon was tense. Claire took the train, sitting quietly in a third-class compartment, her basket on her lap. Inside, hidden beneath a false bottom covered with eggs and vegetables, was money to pay Bernard for the forgeries. At the Lyon train station, German soldiers checked papers. Claire presented hers, including the medical certification of her deafness. The soldier barely glanced at her, disgusted by the sight of a handicapped person, and waved her through. She made her way through Lyon's streets to the address she'd been given, a bookshop in the old quarter. The owner, Madame Rousseau, was part of the network. When Claire entered and made a specific hand signal, Madame Rousseau nodded and led her to a back room. There, working by candlelight, was Bernard Katz, a Jewish man in his 40s who'd been forced into hiding. Using his skills as a printer to forge documents that saved lives, he'd completed the transit papers. 20 sets of documents, each one a masterpiece of forgery. Birth certificates, travel permits, identity cards, all with official stamps that Bernard had painstakingly recreated. Claire carefully placed them in her basket's false bottom, covering them with the eggs and vegetables. Bernard squeezed her shoulder, his eyes saying what his lips didn't need to. "Be careful, please." She left the shop at dusk, timing her departure to catch the evening train. The streets were darker now, harder to read faces. But she moved with purpose, trying not to rush, trying to look like just another village girl heading home after a day in the city. She was 2 blocks from the train station when she felt it, the rumble of truck engines. Multiple vehicles. She turned a corner and froze. A Gestapo checkpoint, unscheduled, unannounced. Officers were stopping everyone, checking papers, searching bags and baskets. Claire's blood turned to ice. The forged documents in her basket could doom not just her, but everyone in the network: Bernard, Madame Rousseau, Father Dominic, Antoine, and most importantly, 20 Jewish children. She couldn't turn back now. That would look suspicious. She had to go forward. She joined the line of people waiting to pass through. Her hands trembled as she clutched the basket handle. She forced herself to breathe, to stay calm. Panic was her enemy. As she waited, she observed. The Gestapo were being thorough tonight. Very thorough. Every basket was being emptied. Every coat was being searched. They were looking for something specific. Claire counted 4 Gestapo officers. The lead officer was tall, with a wolf-like face and cold, intelligent eyes. She'd seen him before in the village. Hauptsturmführer Friedrich Weber, one of the most feared men in the Lyon Gestapo, a man known for personally torturing prisoners, and he was coming down the line, checking each person himself. Claire's mind raced. She couldn't run. She couldn't hide the documents. There was nowhere to go. If they searched her basket thoroughly, they'd find the false bottom, and that would be the end. Unless. She watched Weber's lips as he interrogated people, watched his body language, and she noticed something. He was impatient with delays. When someone stammered or couldn't produce papers quickly, his anger flared. He wanted efficiency. He wanted people to be afraid, but he didn't want to waste time on the obviously pathetic dot an idea formed. Dangerous, possibly suicidal. But it was all she had. When it was her turn, Claire stepped forward. Weber's cold eyes fixed on her. He barked something. She couldn't hear it, but could read his lips. Papers. Now. Claire made her face go blank, confused. She tilted her head as if trying to understand. Weber's face reddened. He repeated the command, louder this time, spit flying. Claire pointed to her ear and shook her head. She opened her mouth and made the awkward, slurred sounds of someone who'd never heard their own voice. G. U.I.S. Sour. I am deaf. Weber's expression changed. Disgust mixed with contempt. He grabbed her papers from her hand, examined them. The medical certification was there. Claire watched his lips. She saw him mutter, Taubstum. Useless creature. Deaf-mute. Useless creature. He thrust the papers back at her, started to wave her through, but then his eye caught the basket. Open it, his lips said. Claire's heart stopped. But she made herself nod obediently, setting the basket down, removing the cloth cover to reveal the eggs and vegetables. Weber poked at them with his gloved hand, grabbed an egg, examined it. Then his fingers went deeper, prodding the vegetables. Time seemed to stop. Claire could feel her pulse in her throat. If he found the false bottom, if those forged documents were discovered, she'd be taken to Gestapo headquarters. She knew what happened there. Everyone did. The screams that neighbors tried not to hear. The bodies that were never recovered. Weber's hand moved lower in the basket. His fingers touched the edge of the false bottom dot, and then from down the street came an explosion. Claire couldn't hear it, but she saw everyone's heads snap toward the sound. Smoke rose in the distance. German soldiers shouted, running toward the blast. A resistance bombing. Had to be. Whether planned or coincidental, it was a gift from God. In the chaos, Weber dropped the basket and barked orders at his men. Claire stood frozen, not sure what to do. Get out of here, Weber's lips said, waving her away dismissively. Go, schnell. Claire didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed her basket, the eggs now broken, yolk seeping through the cloth, and hurried away, walking quickly, but not running, her legs feeling like they might collapse beneath her. She didn't look back, didn't breathe properly until she was on the train, the basket with its precious hidden cargo beside her, Lion disappearing into the darkness behind her. Only when the train was miles away did she allow herself to shake, to cry silently, tears streaming down her face. She'd made it. Somehow, impossibly, she'd made it. The forged documents reached the convent the next morning. 3 days later, 20 Jewish children crossed safely into Switzerland, each carrying papers that identified them as French citizens from Lyon, traveling with their families. Every single one survived the war. Claire never learned their names, but she carried the weight of those 20 lives for the rest of hers. Claire's close call in Lyon should have been a warning, should have been the moment she stepped back, let others take the risks. But by mid-1943, the resistance was desperate. The Gestapo's crackdown was intensifying. Arrests were daily. Executions were public. Informants were everywhere. And Claire was too valuable to retire. She'd become known in resistance circles as Lang Silent Siu, the silent angel, a girl who could move like a ghost, who could gather intelligence no one else could, who'd proven herself again and again. But the Gestapo was getting smarter, and Hauptsturm für Weber, the officer from the checkpoint, had developed a theory. In his office in Lyon, Weber studied reports. A pattern had emerged. Again and again the resistance seemed to know Gestapo plans before they were executed. Operations were compromised. Targets disappeared hours before raids. Someone was leaking information. But how? Weber's security was tight. His men were loyal. There were informants, yes, but they worked for the Gestapo. Not against them. Unless someone was gathering intelligence in a way he hadn't considered. Weber remembered the deaf girl from the checkpoint. Something about her had bothered him. The way she'd stood there, so calm despite the situation. The look in her eyes, not quite as simple-minded as a truly disabled person should be. He pulled her papers. Claire Mitchell, age 17, born in Beaumont. Father, American. Mother, French. Medical certification. Profoundly deaf since birth. American father. That was interesting. The Americans were now in the war. After all, Weber made a note. Put surveillance on the girl. Watch her. See where she goes, who she sees. For 3 weeks, Gestapo informants tracked Claire. And they noticed things. She traveled frequently. Carried baskets to various locations. Visited a bookshop in Lyon. Attended church regularly, staying late to meet with the priest. Innocent activities? Perhaps. Or perhaps the deaf girl was more than she seemed. On April 3rd, 1943, at 3 a.m., the Gestapo came for Claire Mitchell, her mother's terrified face, lit by flashlights, shaking Claire awake. The vibration of boots on stairs. Hands grabbing her, pulling her from bed. A cloth bag shoved over her head, plunging her into total darkness. A darkness even deeper than her silent world. They dragged her downstairs, threw her into the back of a truck. She couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't speak. Terror clawed at her throat. The truck drove for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. When they finally stopped and pulled the bag from her head, Claire found herself in a gray concrete room, lit by a single harsh bulb. Gestapo headquarters. Lyon. They left her alone for hours. A classic technique. Let the prisoner's imagination work on them. Let fear soften them up before the questions even began. Claire forced herself to stay calm. She'd known this might come. She'd prepared for it. She just had to stick to her story, had to be the simple deaf girl they expected her to be. When the door finally opened, Hauptsturm für Weber walked in. Behind him, a French collaborator who would serve as translator. Weber sat across from Claire. He lit a cigarette, studying her through the smoke. Then he began to speak, lips moving deliberately so she could read them. You've been a busy girl, haven't you? Claire made her face confused, shook her head. I don't understand, she signed. Weber smirked. He gestured to the translator, who signed crudely. You understand German, don't you? You lip read. You watch. You spy. Claire's blood ran cold, but she kept her face innocent. She shook her head again, more vigorously. Through the translator, she explained. I shop. I help my mother. That's all. Weber slammed his hand on the table. Even without hearing it, Claire saw the violence in his body language, saw papers jump from the impact. Lies. His lips formed. We know you've been to Lyon 5 times in the past month. We know you visit that bookshop. We know you meet with the priest late at night. Tell me, what messages are you carrying for the resistance? This was it. The moment Claire had to decide, admit nothing, or try to explain in a way that might satisfy him without confirming his suspicions. She chose a middle path, the most dangerous path, but the only one that might work. Through writing and signing, she told a partial truth. Yes, she'd been to Lyon. She was buying books for her father. Yes, she met with the priest. She was taking religious instruction, preparing for confirmation. Yes, she traveled with a basket. She sold eggs at market to help her family make ends meet during the occupation. All true, all innocent, all explanations that a clever girl might give. But Weber wasn't satisfied. He had his theory, and he needed confirmation. What happened next was the longest 4 hours of Claire Mitchell's life. They brought in photographs, images of resistance members they'd identified. Do you know these people? Weber's lips asked. Claire studied each photo, forcing herself to look carefully, not to react. Some she recognized. Antoine was there, looking younger in the photo, taken years before. But she shook her head to each one. No, I don't know them. They showed her maps. Point to where you've been in Lyon. She pointed to the market, the church, the bookshop, all public places, all innocent. They asked the same questions different ways, trying to catch inconsistencies. But Claire's story remained the same. Her face remained confused and frightened, which wasn't hard, since she was genuinely terrified. Finally, Weber changed tactics. He leaned close, so close she could smell cigarettes on his breath. His lips formed words slowly, deliberately. I don't believe you're as stupid as you pretend. I think you're a clever little spy, and eventually I'll prove it. He stood up, nodded to the guards. Release her, but watch her. Every move she makes, I want to know about it. Claire was driven back to Beaumont and dumped at the end of her street as dawn broke. She stumbled home, where her mother collapsed in tears of relief. She'd survived the interrogation, but barely, and now she knew the Gestapo was watching. Asterisk after her interrogation, Claire should have stopped. The smart thing, the safe thing, would have been to disappear from resistance activities, to become actually invisible rather than just appearing so. But stopping would mean letting Weber win. It would mean abandoning people who needed her. And Claire Mitchell had never walked away from a fight. She just had to be smarter. For 6 weeks, she played the perfect innocent village girl. She stayed home. She helped her mother. She went to church. She did nothing remotely suspicious, all while Weber's watchers documented her boring, harmless life. And slowly, Weber's interest waned. The Gestapo had bigger problems. The resistance was growing bolder. Sabotage was increasing, and Allied bombing raids were becoming more frequent. Weber couldn't waste resources watching one deaf girl who did nothing but buy vegetables and pray. By June 1943. The surveillance ended, and Claire went back to work, but this time she was careful. No more regular trips to Lyon, no more patterns that could be tracked. She varied her routes, her timing, her methods. She recruited her mother as an unwitting courier. Elise would carry messages, not knowing what was hidden in the baskets. Claire prepared, and Claire continued to be the Resistance's most valuable intelligence asset. In cafes and markets, she watched German lips move, gathering information that saved lives again and again. In August 1943, she lip-read Gestapo plans for a major roundup of resistance fighters. The operation was called Action Donar, a sweep designed to arrest hundreds in one night across Lyon and the surrounding villages. Claire's warning gave the resistance 36 hours to evacuate their people. When the Gestapo struck on August 12th, they found empty safe houses and abandoned meeting places. The largest anti-resistance operation of 1943 in the Lyon region was a complete failure. Weber, humiliated and enraged, suspected the deaf girl, but he had no proof, and his superiors were asking uncomfortable questions about how the resistance always seemed one step ahead. By early 1944, as Allied forces prepared for D-Day and the liberation of France, Claire had been working for the resistance for nearly 2 years. She'd facilitated the escape of dozens of Allied airmen. She'd helped save hundreds of Jewish refugees. She'd gathered intelligence that had prevented countless arrests, and she'd done it all in silence. On June 6, 1944, D-Day arrived. Allied forces stormed Normandy's beaches. The liberation of France had begun. In Beaumont, Claire felt the ground shake from distant Allied bombs falling on German positions. She watched German soldiers' faces shift from confidence to fear. She saw the moment when occupiers realized they were losing. In September 1944, American forces liberated Lyon. The Gestapo fled, burning documents, leaving their headquarters in chaos. Hauptsturmführer Weber was captured by French resistance fighters before he could escape. When they searched his office, they found a file on Claire Mitchell, full of surveillance photos and notes. The last entry, dated July 1944, read, "Subject: remains under suspicion, but no evidence of resistance activity. Possibly innocent. Case closed." Weber never knew how wrong he was. After the liberation, many resistance heroes were celebrated. Parades were held. Medals were awarded. Stories were told of bravery and sacrifice. Claire attended none of them. She simply returned to her quiet life, helping her mother, reconnecting with her father who'd spent the war years hiding his. American identity. Only once did she speak publicly about her wartime activities. In 1947, a historian interviewing resistance members in the Lyon region came across references to Lang Silencio. When he tracked down the name, he found Claire, now 22, working in her father's engineering office. The historian, speaking slowly so she could read his lips, asked, "How did you do it? How did you fool the Gestapo so many times?" Claire smiled, the first real smile she'd allowed herself in years. She pulled out a piece of paper and wrote, "They thought silence was weakness. They were wrong. In a world of lies and propaganda and shouted orders, silence was the truth. It was power, and it saved lives." Claire Mitchell lived a long life. She married, had children, worked as a teacher of deaf children. She rarely spoke of her wartime service, but the people she saved never forgot her. Years later, one of those 20 Jewish children she'd helped smuggle to Switzerland, now a successful doctor in New York, tracked her down. His name was David Cohn, and he'd been 8 years old when Claire's forged documents gave him safe passage. "I needed to meet you," he said through an interpreter at Claire's home in 1982. "I needed to thank the woman who saved my life." Claire, now 57, her face lined but her eyes still sharp, wrote on a notepad, "You don't need to thank me." "I did what anyone should have done." David shook his head. "But they didn't. You did. 20 of us children survived because of you. We've lived full lives, had families, careers, joy, all because one girl refused to let silence mean surrender." Claire Mitchell passed away in 2003 at the age of 78. Her obituary in the Lion newspaper was brief, mentioning her work as an educator, her loving family, and in one small paragraph, her service in the French resistance during World War II. What it didn't mention was how many lives she'd saved, how many intelligence coups she'd pulled off, how she'd turned the Gestapo's assumptions about disability into a weapon that helped liberate France. Because that's the thing about Claire Mitchell's war. It was fought in silence. Her victories made no sound. Her heroism left no echo. But it mattered. Every life saved mattered. Every operation that succeeded because of her intelligence mattered. In a war filled with the thunder of bombs and the roar of armies. Sometimes the most powerful weapon was the quiet courage of a girl who couldn't hear a sound. If you found Claire's story as powerful as I did, please hit the like button and subscribe for more untold stories of World War II heroes. Leave a comment and let me know, what other silent heroes from history should we remember? Sometimes the most important voices are the ones we almost never hear. Claire Mitchell made sure her silence spoke volumes, and her story deserves to be told, loud and clear. Thanks for watching.